The night I learned someone had been stealing power from my house, I was lying on the garage floor with a flashlight in my teeth and an ammeter clamped around a wire that should not have existed. 24 amps, steady as a heartbeat, flowing through the wall toward my next-door neighbor's property. And the woman living over there was the president of our HOA. The same woman who had spent a year trying to find me for solar panels that were secretly charging her luxury SUV. My name is Mason Reed, and before this happened, I thought I understood electricity better than people. Electricity is honest. It goes where the circuit tells it to go. It leaves a trail. It does not smile at block parties while draining your batteries after midnight. My wife, Rachel, used to say that was why I trusted machines too much. She picked our house in Willow Crest outside Henderson because the roof faced south and caught sunlight nearly all day. We stood in the driveway during the showing, heat rolling off the pavement, and she pointed up. "That's where our power plant goes," she said. She had ovarian cancer by the following winter. 7 months after the diagnosis, she was gone, and I was left with our 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, and a promise I had made beside a hospital bed that I would build the solar system Rachel had dreamed about. So I did. 30 panels, 2 battery walls, a custom monitoring setup, and almost $42,000 I probably should have saved. But grief does not always make responsible decisions. Sometimes grief buys copper wire and spends Saturdays crawling through attic insulation because keeping your hands busy is easier than admitting the person you love is never coming home. Sophie called it Mom's sunshine machine, and I let her. For a while, it gave the house a rhythm again. Then Cynthia Vale showed up. Cynthia had been HOA president for 11 years, which in her mind made her part mayor, part judge, and part border patrol. She drove a pearl-white electric SUV, wore tennis clothes even when there was no tennis involved, and introduced herself by saying, "I keep Willow Crest running properly. Not hello, not welcome, just a warning disguised as a handshake." Her eyes moved to the equipment in my garage. "Solar panels?" she said with the same tone people use when they discover mold. 6 months later, I received a violation letter claiming my panels disrupted the neighborhood's architectural harmony. The fine was $250 a day unless I removed them. I read every page of the rules, found nothing banning solar, then sent Cynthia a calm letter with the state protections attached. She withdrew the violation 2 days later without apology. That should have ended it. Instead, my retired neighbor Earl Benton came over that evening and said, "She never backs down that fast unless she is planning to come around from the other side." I laughed then. I did not laugh 8 months later when my battery logs showed a heavy draw every night between 11 and 5. I checked the air conditioning, water heater, garage outlets, every breaker and splice I had installed. Nothing inside the house explained it. Then I found a hidden feeder line disappearing through the block wall, and the next morning, with Earl's shovel in my hands, I dug along the property boundary until the blade struck white PVC buried under the gravel, running in a straight line from my garage towards Cynthia Vale's house. I followed that pipe another 12 feet until it crossed beneath the decorative stone separating our yards, then stopped and stared at it like it might explain itself. Earl crouched beside me, brushed the dust away with 2 fingers, and gave a low whistle. "That is not amateur work," he said. He was right. The conduit had been buried at a clean depth. The bends were measured, and inside it ran heavy copper wire rated for a 240-volt circuit. Somebody had punched through my garage wall, tapped directly into my electrical panel, crossed the property line, and connected the other end to Cynthia's home. Through a narrow gap in her fence, I could see the green light on her vehicle charger glowing behind a storage cabinet. For nearly 14 months, her SUV had been drinking from Rachel's sunshine machine while Cynthia smiled at me during neighborhood meetings and complained that my panels were ugly. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a calculator, my monitoring logs, and a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it. The stolen electricity was worth a few $1,000s, but the repeated deep cycling had also shortened the life of my batteries. The total damage was somewhere north of 8,000, yet the number that hurt most was not written on any spreadsheet. Sophie came into the kitchen half asleep, saw the papers spread everywhere, and asked, "Is Mom's machine broken?" I told her no because I could not bring myself to explain that someone had been quietly taking from it. At the next HOA meeting, I tested Cynthia without naming her. I stood during public comments and said I had discovered an unauthorized electrical draw near my property line and wanted to know whether anyone else had noticed strange wiring or nighttime power use. Cynthia cut me off before I finished. "Perhaps your homemade system is not as reliable as you advertised," she said, leaning back with that thin little smile of hers. "Solar can be complicated for homeowners who overestimate their expertise." A few people looked at me, then at the floor. 3 days later, I received a fine for leaving my garage door open after approved hours. The week after that, another fine arrived because my mailbox was allegedly faded. Then came one for Sophie's wooden reading shade in the backyard, followed by a warning that my trash bins were visible from the street, which would have required someone to stand on a ladder to see them. Cynthia had made her choice. She knew I was close, and instead of removing the cable, she planned to bury me beneath enough fines and legal threats that I would either stop asking questions or sell the house. That was when Earl told me about the Carsons, the Millers, and an older couple named Dean and Marjorie Shaw. All three families had lived on our street before I moved in. All three had been targeted with constant violations, and all three had eventually sold below market value. The buyer in every case was Cynthia's husband, Grant Vale, a local contractor who renovated the houses and flipped them months later for a healthy profit. Earl stared across my yard as he spoke, his jaw tight. "She wears people down," he said. "Grant shows up acting friendly, offers them a way out, and everybody pretends it is just business." That was the moment the whole thing changed for me. The stolen electricity was not an isolated act of entitlement. It was part of a system. Cynthia used the HOA as a private weapon. Grant collected the property, and everyone who witnessed it learned to keep quiet. I decided I would not confront her until I could prove everything, so I installed cameras around the house, logged every violation letter, photographed dozens of identical conditions at homes that had never been cited, and submitted a formal request for the HOA's financial records. Cynthia ignored it for 3 weeks, then claimed the books were unavailable because of an independent audit. There was an audit. My attorney, Daniel Price, sent one letter on his firm's letterhead, and 48 hours later a cardboard box appeared on my porch. I spent the entire weekend reading bank statements, invoices, meeting minutes, and canceled checks. Most of it was ordinary, landscaping, pool service, insurance, lighting. Then I found a $49,000 payment labeled Community Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, Phase 1. Willowcrest had no public chargers. The payment had gone to Vale Residential Contracting, Grant's company, and the service address listed on the invoice was Cynthia's house. The HOA had paid her husband to upgrade her private electrical panel and install the charger connected to my stolen power. A few pages later, I found another $14,000 paid to a landscaping company owned by Cynthia's cousin for work around Cynthia's pool. By 2 in the morning, I had uncovered more than $60,000 in questionable spending, and suddenly the room felt very still. Rachel used to tell me that anger was loud, but certainty was quiet. Sitting there beneath the soft hum of the batteries, I finally understood what she meant. I called Daniel, laid out everything I had found, and after a long pause he said, "Mason, this is no longer an HOA dispute. This is a criminal case. Over the next 2 weeks we prepared a 3-part response, a police complaint for utility theft, a civil action for selective enforcement and financial misconduct, and a recall petition to remove Cynthia and the board members protecting her." We collected 67 homeowner signatures, far more than we needed, and scheduled a special meeting at the community clubhouse. I also replaced my breaker panel with a smart system that let me monitor and shut off every circuit from my phone, including the illegal line running beneath the fence. I could have cut Cynthia off that same afternoon, but Daniel told me to leave it active a little longer. Every night she charged that SUV, the system recorded another timestamp, another power draw, another piece of evidence. Cynthia still believed she was stealing in the dark, but by then I could see every watt, every minute, every lie, and I was waiting for the one public moment when turning off that circuit would do more than stop her car. Cynthia learned about the recall 5 days before the meeting, and that was when she stopped pretending to be reasonable. First came an email to every homeowner calling me a dangerous troublemaker with a personal vendetta, then a legal threat demanding that I withdraw the petition, and finally, on Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert while I was 40 miles away at a job site. I opened the camera feed and saw Grant Vale standing on my roof where the cord was true, another man beside him loosening the rails beneath my solar panels, while Cynthia stood in my driveway pointing upward like a general directing artillery. "Take every one of them down," she shouted. The first panel slid off the roof and shattered across the patio, then a second, a third, a fourth. I called the police, called Daniel, and drove home with both hands locked around the steering wheel, repeating to myself that anger was exactly what Cynthia wanted from me. By the time I arrived, an officer had Grant sitting on the front steps, and Cynthia was explaining, with complete confidence, that the HOA had authorized the removal of non-compliant equipment. The officer looked at the broken glass, then at her. Ma'am, an HOA cannot authorize you to climb onto someone else's roof and destroy private property. Every second had been recorded, including her order to remove the panels. She thought she had damaged my case, but she had just turned an ugly civil dispute into something a prosecutor could understand in one viewing. The special meeting went ahead that Friday. The clubhouse held 80 people, but more than 120 showed up, standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Cynthia sat at the front in a white blazer, her attorney on one side and 2 nervous board members on the other. Daniel sat beside me, Earl was behind us, and a county investigator stood quietly near the exit. When public comments opened, I walked to the projector and introduced myself. My voice shook on the first sentence, then steadied when Rachel's face came into my mind. I showed the battery logs, the midnight power draw, the photographs of the buried conduit, and the charger inside Cynthia's garage. Then I showed the $49,000 invoice paid to Grant's company, followed by the landscaping payment to her cousin. The room changed slowly, whispers first, then anger, then the kind of silence people make when they realize they have been fooled for years. Cynthia stood and called it fabricated. I held up my phone. Your SUV is outside right now, plugged into the same unauthorized circuit. She glanced toward the windows. I opened the Smart Panel app and touched the red switch. 3 seconds later, someone near the back called out. Her car just shut off. Every head turned toward the parking lot. The cable was still connected, but the dashboard had gone dark. Cynthia's face lost all its color. The investigator stepped forward, showed his badge, and told her she was being detained for utility theft and suspected misuse of association funds. She tried to say she was still HOA president, but the handcuffs closed before she finished the sentence. Grant was stopped near the rear door. Earl leaned toward me and whispered, 11 years of acting untouchable, and she got beaten by a circuit breaker. Cynthia later accepted a plea agreement, repaid the stolen money, and was permanently barred from serving on another HOA board. Grant lost his contractor's license, the false fines were refunded, and Willowcrest elected a new board that published every expense online. I used part of the restitution to create a small solar assistance fund in Rachel's name. The first system went to a single father with 3 kids who had been choosing between groceries and his electric bill. The evening we switched it on, Sophie looked at the panels glowing in the sunset and said, "Mom's sunshine machine is helping other people now." I told her that was probably the whole point. But I still wonder about one thing. If I had confronted Cynthia the moment I found that cable, she might have escaped with nothing more than an embarrassing apology. So was I right to leave the power flowing while I gathered evidence, or did I let a crime continue just to make the ending stronger? Tell me what you would have done, and whether people like Cynthia deserve a second chance after abusing an entire community. Then share this story with someone who thinks an HOA title makes a person untouchable.